Hey, well, welcome back to Allison Customs Project Car TV. Back on Randy's C-10. Body's up here. So what we've got is a original small block chassis. I think these are some CPP big block motor mounts. They don't really line up with much of anything. And then we have what I also believe is a CPP transmission crossmember, which is bolted in, but again doesn't really I think they had to re-drill the holes. It didn't quite line up the way you would expect. Before I took the body off, I measured behind each head, behind the distributor, anything else that I could see would cause a conflict, and we've got about 1.5 inches over on this side and about 2 inches on the other side of clearance back to the firewall before we'd have to make some kind of modification. And the goal is not to modify the firewall, it's just to get the engine as far back as we can. And in looking at it, right now the motor mounts are just sitting on the frame and on the crossmember. If we can go back about 1 inch, which I believe we can, and clear the firewall just fine, we will have to probably re-drill holes for the transmission crossmember. But I think if we can go back about 1 inch, then these big block motor mounts will at least line up with some holes in the crossmember. We may have to re-drill holes up here in the frame, or whatever, but that's kind of my goal, is to get the engine set back about 1 inch and get the crossmember. The other thing I noticed is this is sitting at about 4.5 degrees angled up. And a little bit of that would be taken back out by putting the weight of the body back on here. I should have got that measurement first, but that's a little steep. I mean, I'd kind of like to see that closer to 3 degrees. So in sliding this back, we may look at putting some shims under the transmission or under the crossmember at where it bolts to the frame, and just pick that up just a little bit. So we'll kind of play with that as well. So that's today's project, get the engine set. Basically done with the front end on Randy's truck here. I've got 2 holes to drill, which means I need to pull the engine back out, be able to get a drill in. That went really pretty easily. I needed to trim a few things on the transmission mount to make it clear the inside of the frame a little better, and I needed to just work the engine mounts into place, and it really didn't take very long. That went so well, I was kind of like, there's really nothing to show you here other than bolting some stuff together. So the next thing on this truck, while I have the body off the frame, the cab off the frame, is I need to finish welding up and grinding down welds that I did when we were replacing the kick panels and some of the other pieces. So I've got most of this welded in. I just need to kind of come in here and knock the welds down, make them a little prettier, maybe add a couple more. So on the seat, it looks like Randy had already drilled through the floor and has his seats in the place he wants them. We just need to strengthen up the mounts, because right now they're just through sheet metal. So I'm going to go ahead and weld on some square pieces of probably like 1/8 inch thick plate with a hole in it. And then I'll weld these weld-on nuts to the bottom of that so that it's easy to put the seats in and out. So we've got a couple other holes in the floor that probably for the other seat mounts or whatever, and we'll go ahead and weld those up while we've got the body off the frame. So we moved on with Randy's truck just a little bit, and some of the things I went ahead and got done that are just really hard to kind of film is I put in some backing plates or some strengthening plates for the seat mounts, and I used, much like I did on the Scout, I used just a plate of steel and then some of those flat weld-on washers or weld-on nuts rather, and went ahead and built up all of the places where his seats mount. These are the plates I put in and the nuts for the seat mounts, and I did that pretty much all 8 locations. Those are a little harder to see. Maybe that one's a little better. You can see we just made a plate that fit the flat area there and welded it on. And that should just help spread the load of that seat. You can see same thing over here. The other thing I did is I came in, and on one side we'd already pretty much fixed the body mount strengthener, or body mount, I guess. It had some rust down here in the bottom where stuff had been captured in there. And the other side still had the rust in it, but it wasn't too bad, so I cut that out and replaced the metal there. And all I had to do was probably a 1.5 inch wide by 3 inch piece on this side. This side was a little bit longer, came almost all the way up to the body mount hole. And then we had a couple holes in the floor where somebody had put in a seat of some sort at some time and just drilled holes through the floor, and so we kind of cleaned that up and straightened those out and welded the hole up. And a bunch of little screw holes that people had run screws down into the floor, and we took those out and welded those up. So the floor is pretty much ready for him to prime and undercoat. He started priming this side, and what I need to do for him to get finished though is there's a couple of pieces out here on the bottom of the firewall that I need to go ahead and fill the holes for him. There's 2 holes, one on each side that we'd missed that are right above the floor support that I can't get the welder to from the bottom side. So I'm going to go ahead and need to pull the seats out to get to those and weld them up. So I also need to go ahead and do something with this. We had talked about maybe he would find a shifter that would utilize this hole. And I think what I'm going to do is just trim the hole and put a piece of steel over it and, you know, just shape it to match the transmission tunnel and just repair this. That one, these two bolt holes that are up under here, and then this thing will be ready for undercoating. And one more item I want to do on the frame, and then that's pretty much done too. So let's move on. All right, well, we're going to fill this hole and this hole. So I just went over to the shear, picked up a piece of 16 gauge that's about the right width. This end is anyway. We'll kind of clean that up, make us a rectangle to fill this one. And then we're gonna fill this hole. So probably what I'll need to do is just kind of trim this down, get it roughly the right width, and then put some magnets on it from the inside, and we'll get that welded in. We got a little dent right there, so we need to straighten that out a little bit. But we'll get that in there, draw the shape, and get this piece put in. Well, I've cleaned up the metal around the 2 holes we're gonna be fixing up. Went ahead and made my patch. It's going to go in, it's going to go in like that, and then I've got another one for this rectangle. We're going to weld those in, and then we'll grind off the welds. Now this will take a little while because we don't want to put too much heat in here, start putting warps up into the firewall. There is a rib right here for support, and we've got, of course, the bend right here, which will help, but we still don't want to push too much heat up in there. So we'll just tack weld around it. We'll let that one cool for a few minutes. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and get this one started. And we'll let that one cool. A couple more rounds of putting some welds on them and letting them cool, and then we can grind them off and work on a couple of those holes that are in the floor that we want to get rid of. All right, got them all welded up. They're getting hot right now, so we're going to let that cool down for a little while. All right, well, these are all filled in, ground down. And, okay, so we got those things up here on the firewall patched, and then I've gone in and patched that hole in the bottom of the transmission tunnel, and that took, probably 45 minutes to weld that in, or make the patch and weld it in. So this is all done now. The body is ready for the undercoat. I'm going to raise it all up. We're going to roll the frame back, and we're going to do the last item on the frame, and then that's it for this project. It's headed home, and he can do the other things that he's got going on it until he's ready to, I don't know, until we're ready to try and wire it and start it, I guess. So let's get the frame under here. Okay, so what's left is we need to make room for a drive shaft. This is a piece of 2-inch pipe, and you can see right here, let's see, that's about where it ought to be. Right here we have maybe 5/8 of an inch or a little less, and you got to figure for a big block with a blower, we're looking at probably a 3-inch diameter drive shaft to be able to handle the horsepower that he's planning on. So we just need to make this drive shaft opening just slightly larger. We basically have, let's call it a 1/2 inch there, and that would get us up to, if we had a 1/2 inch, that means a 3-inch would just touch this. We need enough room for the axle to move, although it shouldn't be going this way because of the triangulated forelink. So all we really need to do is just open this area up a 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, and that'll give us plenty of room. So what we'll do is I'll get a marker, and we'll mark where we want it open. And then what I'm going to do is take a piece of 3/4 inch flat bar so that it matches this flange that's on the back side. So now you can see this factory flange that's on there, and that's from where they pushed this metal out. What we want to do is just replicate this. Looks like, so we're going to come in and just right here where we need to open it up, we're going to put a 1/2 inch to a 3/4 inch piece of flat bar and weld it onto the cross member. And then once it's in place, then we'll come in either with a grinder or a plasma cutter and cut the material, material we want out of there, out of the way, and then weld the seam and grind it all up. Grind off the inside to give it that same smooth rounded finish. It'll look stock-ish and still keep the strength in here because we'll have that flange on the cross member. So I spent a few minutes at the vise with a hammer and bent this piece of flat bar around into the U shape that will become, on the other side, it'll become the lip that supports this mod. And I've gone ahead and cleaned up the metal on both sides, and I just went ahead and notched out as much of the cut as I dared, just so that it would take a little less effort to clean it up later, and I didn't have to drag out a plasma cutter just to do about 2 minutes worth of cutting. So I'm going to go ahead and get this tack welded on. Well, there it is. I welded the inside and the outside. That gave me plenty of material so that I could grind kind of a curve in here to kind of give it the factory look for it being pressed. Of course, there's a bead around the outside that you could take a die grinder to and try and clean it up, but it doesn't look bad, and it's going to be painted and underneath the vehicle, so I'm not really sure it's worth the time to do that. But you can see now we've got plenty of room in here for a bigger drive shaft, and it won't matter whether it's a 3-inch, or probably even wouldn't matter if we had a 4-inch. So for now, that pretty much takes care of Randy's truck. We've got the motor mounts done, the transmission mount done. I even built some shims for the cross members so that we could get the angle closer to 3 degrees. It was sitting at about 4.5 degrees. So, and I made them 3/16 inch shims with, currently we have about 1 inch of shims on each side. But then when we get everything weighted down and sitting right, before we put the carburetor on, we can check the angle one more time, and if we need to, we can take a couple of shims out. Welded up the 4-link, put the cross member in for the coilover shocks. We've cut this out for the drive shaft. We did a fuel tank. On the body, we've added mounts for the seats. We filled in a bunch of holes, and we cleaned up when we did a bunch of the rocker panels and cab corners and stuff. We cleaned up a lot of that was underneath that just wasn't worth trying to crawl underneath the truck when it was sitting on the frame trying to do that. So we've really knocked out quite a few things here over I've had the truck for about 10 days, and I've worked on it probably 4 days total, maybe a part of another day. I'm pretty happy with it. I'm going to go ahead and roll this frame back out of the way a little bit underneath the body. Randy should be here tomorrow to undercoat the body, and then we'll set it down on the frame once that's dry. So, well, here we go with Randy's truck. It's all undercoated, and we just used the Harbor Freight rubberized undercoating, primed everything, and then rattle can sprayed on the undercoating. Put a couple coats on, and it looks pretty darn good. It covered real nice. It's definitely sealed everything up to be a good base for him to go ahead and get this down on the frame, or for me to get it back down on the frame. The deal is, you're talking with Randy, we're going to run this big block, blown big block. It's got a Roots type blower for it, and he's going to run a TH400. Well, some of you may remember when I introduced the red GMC truck, you see in the background a lot with the car cover or in the bed is on its original frame. So that truck had like a 15-year-old engine and transmission, or well, 15-year-old rebuild. They only have like 3,000 miles on them. And there's a gear vendor's overdrive unit on the TH400 that's in that truck. So we're going to pull that TH400, swap it over here onto Randy's frame, and take this one, which is an old transmission I had and it's just a core. We'll swap that in there or do something to hold up the engine. And then this project is done. But since I have the cab off, and one transmission is in that frame, and this one's right here, 6 bolts, the torque converter. I don't even think there is a torque converter in this one, so swap the torque converter out of that one, and it's done. And then we can drop the body on for the last 6 bolts in the steering wheel, or the steering column. So there you have it. That's it for Randy's truck. It's ready to go. Well, it's halfway out the door as it is. It's ready to go back to his place. He's got a little bit of work to do. You could start sanding body panels, stuff like that, and start getting some primer on it. I guarantee we'll see this truck again, because at some point we're probably going to have to do something with this bedside and the other one, whether we replace them or whether we do a whole bunch of body work on them. You'll see them for that. And then of course you'll see it when we start doing the final assembly and the wiring and stuff like that. Now, May be a while, but for now, it's out of here. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Hit the bell for notifications, all that other YouTube stuff. We'll see you again next time on Allison.